get ready for all the activity on November 5. Now I want to fill you in on the general election. Last night, we hosted some of our friends from our local gang up here, and that included, of course, Mark the Digger and Tony, Mr. CRE, and their wonderful spouses, and my brother-in-law. We had a great time, and as usually happens in this season, talk turned to politics, and I was asked, since it's what I do, what is going to happen? To which I replied honestly, I don't have any idea, and nobody has any idea, because nobody knows what the turnout model is. And I can tell you that today NBC shocked Team Harris by saying the race is tied. On Sunday, they released their polls, and they did a poll a month ago that had Harris up 5, and their new poll shows that Harris is tied with Trump. And that, of course, sent off every alarm bell in the world. But if they hadn't heard that already, they haven't been listening, because every indicator of the election ahead is positive for Trump, which, of course, ought to make Trump people very uneasy. They like to run from behind. I don't know how they even react to being ahead, and they are ahead. If we just go with the data, they are ahead, because Trump underpolls, and Trump is tied everywhere, and in some crucial swing states like Pennsylvania, he is ahead. And I expect his turnout will be great. I do want to bring to your attention one New York Times story yesterday. Harris struggles to win over Latinos while Trump holds his grip, polls show. Why would we even care about the sub-tabs for a lead article? All right, why do we care about which way blacks are going, which way Latinos are going, except as an indication as to why Trump is winning? They are preparing a narrative for, they being legacy media, are preparing a narrative to explain why Donald Trump wins on election night if they find themselves confronted with that eventuality. Now, they hate that prospect. The body language, the hostility, the never-ending assault on Trump and Vance is part of legacy media's. They're on tilt. If you come from the pinball era, you know when a machine tilts is you've hit it too hard, and it tilts and you can't play anymore. Well, they can't play anymore because they've tilted. They've tilted out. They absolutely have no ability to report anything remotely fairly or with the appropriate emphasis. Example, over the weekend, we had Netanyahu call Biden, or Biden call Netanyahu late last week. In that phone call, it's widely reported in the Israeli press that Joe Biden asked, nudged, demanded Netanyahu not hit Beirut anymore. Doesn't matter that Hezbollah is all over Beirut and they have weapons all over Beirut. Doesn't matter. Biden hasn't, the headline in the Times of Israel, IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, hasn't hit Beirut in recent days following Biden request. Guess what happened over the weekend? 2 Hezbollah drones hit, one hurt dozens and dozens of civilians. I believe the death toll there is 4. A second one hit an Israeli air base and the Golani base. 41 soldiers wounded. So we have 2 major incidents over the weekend. The U.S. is sending a THAAD system, a high-altitude defense system. 100 American soldiers are deploying. So much for the combat zone not having it. And all Joe Biden does is give bad advice. Netanyahu would be well served by doing exactly the opposite of whatever Joe Biden asked him to do, because Joe Biden is being advised by people who do not care for Israel at all. It just is clear to me they just have allowed Netanyahu hatred to blind them. But he has incompetently performed, and Kamala Harris spent the weekend not talking about this. She went to a black church. She did another one of her word salads. Joy comes in the morning. You've seen it on the internet. I'm not going to play for you again. All I can say is America is collectively coming to the conclusion that Harris-Walz may be the worst ticket they've ever seen. Most people don't remember 72. I don't remember 72 very well. But McGovern-Eagleton didn't even make it to the end, right? Eagleton had to drop off. But Harris-Walz, it's really bad. Why? They aren't coherent. They don't know how to make an argument. Do we have the video of Tim Walz hunting? This was truly objectively terrible. Cut number, where is the B-roll? Cut number 8. Just roll it. In Minnesota, Tim Walsh wants to show that he knows what he's doing. And he takes out the longest gun I've ever seen.
What kind of gun is it?
It's a shotgun. And he doesn't know how to work it. He doesn't, it'd be like me with a shotgun. Here, Hugh, here's a shotgun. Go into a field with an orange vest. And I saw some comments online that the gun safety approach, they had the reporters and the handlers and the paparazzi in front of him. And he's wandering around with a gun he can't work. I really, everything they do, every single thing they do is bad. David Urban, one of the handful, Scott Jennings and David Urban make up all the conservatives at CNN. I don't know that there are any at NBC, ABC, CBS. Really, I don't. I don't know if there's any pro-Trump person on any of those stations, but Scott Jennings, McConnell guy, and very smart W guy, David Urban, Trump guy, both of them were on a lot. They do their best. Here is David Urban on CNN's panel yesterday, cut number 17.
She had a terrible week. It was a terrible week for the Harris this campaign. You had Gretchen Whitmer having to apologize to the Catholics across America for mocking them with some bizarro Dorito thing on there. You had Governor Elmer Fudd out hunting and not knowing how to load his shotgun, using the wrong gun. At the same time,
who's Governor Elmer Fudd?
Governor Walsh was out there. It looked like Elmer Fudd. You know, be very, very quiet while hunting for rabbits.
Oh my God!
Right? So he can't load his shotgun. He's trying to appeal to hunters. He can't load the gun. He's using the wrong gun. At the same time, you have Barack Obama in Pennsylvania where he derided people who own guns. Remember, people in Pennsylvania were bitter and they clinged to guns and religion. Remember that in 2008? So they're trying to appeal to those folks at the same time while he alienates black male voters by chastising them. So they had a really tough week this week.
Very tough week, and it showed up in the polls. President Obama yelling at black men. We've got to go find that clip, Generalissimo, during the break, because he did. He lectured black men that they're afraid of black women and they won't vote for her as a result. Maybe the biggest blowback I've seen, maybe the biggest misstep of his political career since his first debate with Mitt Romney. There are very few times when Barack Obama steps in it, but he stepped in it this weekend yelling at black men. I don't know how many black men are out there who have not seen that clip or heard about that clip, but they will. Being lectured by the multimillionaire, Martha Vineyard-living, jet-set, Davos-loving former Chicago state senator who lucked into the presidency, telling them they have to vote for Kamala, and they're just not sold on Kamala Harris. And they won't be sold on Kamala Harris, and Latinos aren't sold on Kamala Harris, and blacks aren't sold on Kamala Harris, and whites aren't sold on Kamala Harris. Americans aren't sold on Kamala Harris. I think this could break pretty dramatically. Now, October surprises are real. Last night at dinner, I said the big October surprise could be all-out war between Israel and Iran, because Netanyahu has had it with the gang running the Weakness Are Us franchise at 1600 Pennsylvania, the appeasement club, which has gathered at Foggy Bottom, the National Security Council, the Department of Defense, and the White House. He's had it, and Israel lost a lot of people this weekend, injured a lot of people this weekend. They are going to take the gloves off. They've got 4 divisions in southern Lebanon, and the gloves are going to come off pretty soon with Iran. They're going to pick their own time in choosing, they've said, to respond, but they can't wait too long, right? They've got to do it while people have it fresh. And Netanyahu's probably come to the conclusion correctly, even though the risk is declining of a Kamala Harris presidency, it would be the worst president for Israel since 1948 in the state founding, because she doesn't really like the Israelis. And she's made that about as clear as anyone can make anything clear that she says. But that's the bottom line on the weekend. The bottom line on the weekend is it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. Best of times because the Guardians open up tonight at Yankee Stadium. Alex Cobb starting for the Guardians. I may be a little incoherent this week because the American League Championship Series, the Guards are in it. Last time they were in it was in 2016 when they were still named the Indians. But they beat the Tigers in Game 5 with a grand slam home run from Lane Thomas. So I had a good weekend there. The Browns apparently are not going to play football this season at all. So we might be 1-16, which is fine. We need a new quarterback. That's pretty obvious to everyone. So Deshaun will play out his ridiculous contract for 2 more years. We'll get a rookie for 2 years, and maybe Deshaun will be a decent backup. We'll see. But in the meantime, it's Guardians Week. I'll be up late every night this week. I'm just asking you in advance for a little bit of grace. because I'm not going to be getting my 7 hours of sleep this week, not with Guardians Yankees on tap. But generally, good news. Looks like Donald Trump is coming back, and we have a lot of ground to make up. 800,000 Floridians still without power as we enter into week 2 of coverage of Hurricane Milton. Over at HughHewitt.com, the relief supplies banner is up. You have been very, very generous. I'm very impressed with this audience. Thank you. I read over the weekend the story in the Washington Post about the Spanish Lakes Country Club Villas, which was a trailer park and utterly destroyed. Number of people killed. The club, many things is gone. It's going to take these people a long time to recover. I talked with my two buddies down there, Rob and Fairway. Fairway and I I've been teaching fairway golf for a long, long time. But he had 8 people at his house, 6 dogs, because he was on relatively high ground in Tampa. Lost power for 2 days. He's okay, but a lot of people aren't. Give a listen if you can to Rosemary Smith talking to Food for the Poor.
Helene flooded our house. We had 4 feet of water in it. They have since removed the drywall, and we can't live in it now. So we found a mobile home to move into, and now we're in the mobile home. And they told us to evacuate mobile homes because of the intensity of the hurricane.
4 feet of water in the first storm. Then you have to get out of the mobile home. You can call in a donation to 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673, or you can go to HughHewitt.com, my website. Everything that we do is right there, and right there at the very top is the Relief Supplies banner. Please be as generous as you can. You have been very great, but it's going to be a long time rebuilding. And the Food for the Poor is rolling trucks both in Florida and in North Carolina, where it continues to be sort of a media blackout. I'm not inclined to report on North Carolina because there's so much nonsense out there about what's going on up there, but it's bad. It's very bad in the hills. My Tennessee correspondent, John Schroeder, has written about what's going on in East Tennessee, and I trust John. I just don't know what to think about this there. Now, why am I leaving Maine now? Well, finally, the North American Wife Carrying Championship is over. You may not know this, but it's an annual event at Sunday River, a ski resort in Maine, one of the biggest. And if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, you can see the end of it. It is an international competition, wife carrying. It's been around for a while, but the North American Wife Carrying Championship is now complete. You might wonder, how do they carry their wives? And how many different people can contribute? Well, can compete. There are a lot, and they all carry their wives the same way. The wives, well, you actually have to see it. It's not something I've ever competed in, but it's awfully funny. And now that that's concluded, I can leave Maine for the year and say goodbye. But I'm going to leave Maine for the year knowing that when I come back, Donald Trump will be in the White House, and Maine's second will probably have a Republican, Austin Thurl, going to win up there and beat Jared Golden, who wants to really be governor of Maine, not a congressman. Not very impressed around my Mainers up here. Not very impressed with Jared Golden. We got Vic Mattis out of bed this morning, the weekend editor of the Washington Free Beacon, co-host of Getting Hammered, Vic Mattis. I almost called you this weekend, Vic, to say I'm rethinking our entire media relationship.
Uh-oh, what happened?
What do you think you told us in the most recent Getting Hammered episode that has caused me to rethink?
Oh boy, the episode is just blended in my head, Hugh. It's all together in a jumble. You're gonna have to refresh my memory. I say a lot of things.
You eat and like tofu.
Oh, I did say that. Yes, I'm sorry. I do in certain settings, in certain dishes. I'm man enough to say that.
Vic, that is something I would expect out of Kamala Harris, Tim Walz with a shotgun eating tofu, but not from the favorite. There's a Venn diagram of podcasts that the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I listen to, and the only one in there is Getting Hammered. We both hate tofu. Who gave tofu to you? Why did that start?
I think when I realized it was in my hot and sour soup and then my miso soup, I said, in Asian dishes, it's quite tasty and it's kind of kind of like you could have it deep fried. It's like eggs. It's like eating eggs, but it's protein. So if it's done right and has flavor to it, I'll say, Hugh, the only thing I want you to remember is this: that there are only three things in the world I really don't eat, and that's sun-dried tomatoes, eggplant, and capers. That's it. I love everything else.
Do you eat lima beans?
Yes, I do. I'm not
You
afraid.
are a
I'm not
creature
afraid of
from
that.
a different planet. I'm really talking to an alien. This is Alien 4 right here. All right, Vic, let's get serious. We had two of the most amazing answers in political history given over the weekend by none other than J.D. Vance, Buckeye, graduate of The Ohio State University. They take a little bit of time, so I wanted to, we may keep you through the break here to talk to you about this, but let's talk first about, he sits down with Lulu Garcia Navarro, who may be the most condescending reporter I've ever seen on video. This is a 3-minute segment, but let's settle in and listen to J.D. Vance instruct Lulu Garcia Navarro on home construction. Cut number 5.
The reason that there is a housing crisis is that not enough houses have been built.
And that we have 25 million people who shouldn't be here.
Well, I mean, this is the thing.
I think it's both.
I know you do. I don't think that many people who look into this agree with you, but about a third of the construction workforce in this country is Hispanic. Of those, a large portion are undocumented. So how do you propose to build all the housing necessary that we need in this country by removing all the people who are working in construction?
Well, I think it's a fair question because we know that back in the 1960s when we had very low levels of illegal immigration, Americans didn't buy houses, didn't build houses. But of course they did. And I'm being sarcastic.
Stop for a second. Do you know, Vic, he told a joke and she totally didn't get it. So he had to explain it, right? That's not a good thing for a reporter who is so humorless that they don't get the fact that it was the housing boom in the 1960s. On we go.
Service of a point, Lulu, the assumption that because a large number of home builders now are using undocumented labor, that's the only way to build homes. I think, again,
the country is much bigger. The need is much bigger. I mean, I'm not arguing in favor of illegal immigration. I'm asking how you would deal with the knock-on effect of your proposal to remove millions of people who work in a critical part of the economy.
Well, I think that what you would do is you would take, let's say, for example, the 7 million prime age men who have dropped out of the labor force, and you have a smaller number of women, but still millions of women prime age who have dropped out of the labor force. You absolutely could re-engage folks into the American labor market. This is, I think,
to work in construction.
Of course, you could.
I mean, the unemployment rate is 4.1%. Most people
unemployment rate, Lulu, this is important.
But most people who don't work can't work in the regular economy. They're in the military. They're parents. They're sick. They're old. They might not want to work in construction.
The unemployment rate does not count labor force.
We'll stop right here. Vic, what do you think of her tone, her arguments, her absolutely wild connections and assumptions, as well as that offhanded people who study this? My guess is she didn't talk to anyone who studied this.
Yeah, experts say, Hugh, that's always a good fallback for anybody. Experts say, well, no, I mean, she represents the mainstream media writ large. That's their sense. That's their disdain of, the Trump Vance ticket at the moment. We've seen this obviously in the past. And they're sort of outraged when they get challenged. And I know you have other clips coming up, and I already know, I know what the next clip is going to be. But yes, they don't want to be challenged by this. And unfortunately, in this setting, there's no microphone to, cut them off like it was at the CBS debate. So again, what
she's so
like
wildly uninformed about housing. I did housing land use lawyering for 27 years till I retired in 2016. She is wildly uninformed about why houses aren't built in America, and it's primarily federal, state, and local regulatory obstruction. It is true that the largest number of drywallers in California are Hispanic, but that doesn't mean they're undocumented. The assumption that every construction worker is undocumented is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard a reporter say. It really is, Vic. There may be some undocumented labor out there, but these people are highly skilled tradespeople who belong often to unions. It was really dumb. Let's go. But what do you think is my second clip?
Yeah. It's going to be Martha Raddatz, ABC.
You got it. Yeah. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Let's play it. Cut number 6 for those who were hiding under a rock this weekend.
Understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly
that
exaggerated.
Means that there's got to be some. That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything.
Vic, what did you make of this? I have many thoughts. What are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is when Martha Raddatz says, again, sort of representing the media writ large, when she says, because I know. That's who, every time you're like, oh, who's going to be our arbiter of truth? These are the people. And they'll tell us what, this is who we're relying on to tell us what is true and not true. So, I mean, that's just thoroughly depressing and it's just loathsome. That's the first thing. The second thing is, J.D. Vance was not my pick when we were figuring out who Trump was going to pick to be his running mate. And yet he does such a great job, and I can see why this works. He doubles down, and with the exception of asking him, about Trump in 2020, he's not going to punt, and he doesn't. Not only does he not get on the put on the defensive here, he goes on offense against her. And again, I think it's great because it just shows the utter disdain they have when they say, "Oh, it's just who cares about those people?" I think that was the ultimate line.
Yeah, the best line is, "Do you hear yourself?"
Yeah,
there are Venezuelan gangs taking over some apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. By the way, I've known Mike Kaufman for almost 20 years. He is, I think, now a never-Trumper. In 2016, he was against Trump, and he lost his seat, I believe, in 2016. He was a member of Congress. Great veteran, deployed to Iraq. I campaigned for him along with his wife. I've known him a long time. He is now standing up for his city after his city got all the bad press. It had nothing to do with Trump. It had to do with the video that went viral. And of course, the mayor is going to stand up and say, it's not that bad. Don't leave Aurora, please, businesses. And people are mad at him for not stopping it before it got in there. But the "do you hear yourself" line, do you think that's going to leave a mark?
Yeah, they should put out T-shirts that have that in quotes. Do you hear yourself? I mean, because or bumper stickers, because that's really what it's all about. I hope it does. I mean, they're just not going to want him to be on on the talk shows. But again, I'm glad that he goes on and battles them. He's not hiding away because we know that strategy does not work.
Vic, I'm going to close when we go to the break with the Obama. Well, let's play President Obama's clip first, and we'll talk about it and then finish during the break. Here's President Obama telling black men in Pennsylvania they're bad people.
Communities is that we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly and say that when you have a choice that is this clear, when on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles and pain and joy that comes from those experiences, who's had to work harder and do more and overcome and achieves the second highest office in the land.
Oh, okay, Vic. Not only do we have the infusion of the black accent at critical
Yes,
moments,
suddenly.
we have the brothers, and we have the most condescending president we've ever had, Mr. Harvard Law. Take a minute. I'll call for break, and then we'll go on. What do you think of this?
Yeah, my favorite part of that little spiel that he gave was that, voting for somebody who grew up like you. Really? They grew up in Canada?
Yeah, that's right. Berkeley in Canada with two academics for parents.
Yeah, no, it's like if you want to get somebody to vote your way, you don't tell them that they're an idiot for voting for the other person. That's not going to bring them over. It's like trying to convince your friend to dump, his girlfriend. It just doesn't work that way.
What will you do on Getting Hammered this week about last week, the very terrible, horrible, very bad week that Kamala Harris had?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what our interest is, because we can't resist, is the palace intrigue, the internal struggle related to internal polls. Now, we haven't seen the internal polls, right? I mean, we get them from leaked to the press from some of these Senate races like Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin or Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan. Supposedly, through those internal polls, they say Kamala Harris is underwater in Michigan. It's clearly reflecting on what we're hearing about in the campaign. It's the Obama people versus the Biden people. I mean, she inherited all those people. Now, she doesn't have her own people, of course, because her, staff turnover rate is about 93, 94%. So we kind of relish in that sort of intrigue and gossip. I know we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the other numbers, sort of the larger picture, because, again, we only have 2 or 3 weeks left. But I think
Vic,
that's for
are
us
you
what-
familiar with the tragic line, the search operation is now a recovery operation? Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that line in
Yes,
media?
of course.
Okay,
Yeah, of
so
course.
the search operation has become a recovery operation. That means whoever it is, they're not alive. So the search operation for what's wrong at the Harris campaign has become sort of a recovery operation, do you think?
Yeah. I don't want to get ahead of our skis over here, because it's still going to be, I believe, a very close election. All the signs are pointing towards Trump and whatever he's doing, just to continue to do that. It seems to be working for him. But it does look like they're acting and they're behaving like they're losing. Again, just the very notion that they would want to do a media blitz tells me, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Clearly, something they thought was broke, and that was probably the internal poll. So they decided to go out and do the media blitz. That made things worse. What I'd love to see, and this is a big if, she loses, I would love to see a great tell-all of somebody on that side of the campaign.
Oh, there are going to be so many tell-alls.
Just the courage.
I can't
It's
wait.
just what it's like. in
Vic,
there.
I want to conclude by playing for you a video. You and Mary Catherine may be unaware of the North American Wife Carrying Championship, which is held annually in Maine at Sunday River Ski Resort, which occurred this past weekend. If you're watching, you can see the video of a couple of the contestants in the wife carrying. They have to go over logs. They have to go through the mud pit. It's a 287-yard dash, which involves a husband carrying a wife. And I didn't see either you or Steve in this competition this year.
No, that would be interesting. Steve is very fit. My wife would be very easy to carry. That's not the issue. The issue would be my back. That's all I'm going to say.
Vic, the prize is $500. Then they put your spouse on a teeter-totter and they put on cases of beer, and you get to keep all the beer that levels are out. Does that entice you?
Yes, right after this show, I'm going to be doing my jump squats. I'll get ready for next year's.
I have posted a link to the North American Wife Carrying Championship, and I think if you and Mary Catherine were to broadcast and you and Steve were to carry your spouses respectively, it would do wonders for the podcast.
Yeah, well, as you know, Hugh, we do anything for the show. So,
all right, next year, it's always Columbus Day weekend, Vic. Thank you so much, Mr. Tofu. We're not going to forgive you for that, but Getting Hammered is our podcast of choice when we're together in the car, so you should try it as well. Thank you, Vic Mattis. Good morning, Selena. How are you?
I'm swell. How are you?
I am terrific. This is the best of times, the worst of times. Best of times because the Guardians are playing the Yankees in the American League Championship Series beginning tonight at 7:30. So the whole world is rooting for my club, the Guardians, except the tiny number of Yankees fans that there are in the world. And it's the worst of times because the Browns have decided not to play. I don't know if you watched any of the Browns Philadelphia Eagles game yesterday. Apparently, Team Harris thinks that you can win Philadelphia voters by advertising in the Phillies game because she was all over the Eagles game. She was all over that game. What do you think? Does she have a prayer in Pennsylvania?
Well, I mean, she has a prayer in Philadelphia, but in Pennsylvania, she's always had a really, really tough time. She's just not a good fit for our state. This is a person that has really, really never had to run and earn the vote of a Republican voter who doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome, or an independent voter, or a sort of a centrist Democrat. In California, almost everyone is, in line as a progressive Democrat. So her ability to communicate and relate to that voter is a challenge because it's never been part of her portfolio. By the way, who's the Guardians?
Well, I go along with the flow. I don't have enough bandwidth to argue the Indians thing forever. Selena,
Oh, okay.
luckily, we have the vice president recognized her inability to communicate, so she went out and got a superb communicator as a running mate, right? Tim Walz. He's really overwhelming. Did you see Tim Walz goes hunting?
That hurt my heart. as some as someone who comes from a family of hunters, that was hard. I know he's in Pittsburgh today, but nobody knows where. I do know that he will be in an Amish town and then Butler on Tuesday. But the details are the tiny at best. I'm not quite sure
What
what's
when you
what's
see
going
that
on
video
there.
of the governor, does the deer hunter come to mind? Is that how Robert De
Oh,
Niro and began the deer hunter with that kind of effortless
oh,
ability to not load a shotgun?
that again, that just hurt my heart. Remind me of John Kerry in Poland, Ohio, in 2004, October 22nd, 2004. That's how much that was in my memory. And I mean, just don't try to be something that you're not, because what the thing is with voters, they're always looking with great scrutiny for authenticity. You don't have to be just like them, and when you try to be just like them and you aren't just like them, it flops.
Look, Selena, I have no idea who's going to win this. I told dinner guests last night, nobody knows what the turnout model is, so everyone's guessing. But I think Team Trump feels pretty good, and I think Team Harris is falling apart and panicking. What's your gut tell you right now about the way the election is moving?
Well, I can talk about my state because I'm just sort of in, you know, I'm not moving because it seems to be whatever happens in Pennsylvania happens in the Great Lake Midwest states of Michigan, Wisconsin, obviously Ohio. And and to the earlier point, she's not a good fit. Now she will do well in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but in Philadelphia you have to get, if Harris is having a good night, she will have 1 million more voters than Trump in Philadelphia. But that didn't happen even in 2020. Again, I say this over and over again, but if you're looking at a map on election night, watch Cambria County, watch Luzerne, watch Erie, see what the turnout is in those counties, and that will tell you pretty much how the rest of the night is going to go.
Now, Selena, I do not hold myself out as any kind of expert on the African American demographic. I'm not. But I do know that Barack Obama berating the quote brothers, close quote, is not a good look. It went
No.
viral and it didn't go viral because it was inspiring. How does that play in Philly, do you think?
So I was talking to black male voters in Pittsburgh, and that didn't go well there. Nothing is more insulting. In particular, he then goes and talks in front of an all white audience. That is even that's even more insulting, right? That he's going to lecture black males about who they're supposed to vote for. And I asked JD Vance about this in Johnstown, Pennsylvania on Saturday. I'm like, is this how you go after voters that are skeptical about you? And he's like, no, I wouldn't do that. That's insulting.
All right, Selena, two things I want to cover with you in the break period. Number one, here is the beginning of a quote of J.D. Vance and Martha Raddatz, which was heard around the world. She's, of course, the fill-in host for George Stephanopoulos. She's been in D.C. longer than I mean, she's been there forever. And her husband, her second husband, I think, was married to an Obama FCC chairman. I think we know she's a blue bubble person from the Beltway. I don't know Martha. But here is she and J.D. Vance, cut number 6.
Understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
Well, Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
There's got to be some. That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America
All
were
right,
taken
stop
over
right
by...
there. Selena, I've got nothing against Martha Raddatz, but I'm going to stop you there, Senator, because I know it's like the person, it was the consolidation of every reason why America hates the Beltway. I know, and you don't, J.D. Vance. What did you think of that?
Well, first of all, it is the perfect example of a press that is completely located in a safe bubble where people that would scare them because they're known criminals, right, won't be living next door to them. So they don't have to worry about it, right? There's no sense of concern about your safety because it's not going to happen to her. So just because there's only a couple, I mean, American families should not be afraid because gangs from whatever country, including our own, are moving into your apartment complex, and you are afraid to go outside and walk your dog. You're afraid
So
to
what?
go.
What is wrong with ABC News? I could ask this about CBS and their struggle session over the interview with Mr. Coates, but I mean, ABC did the David Muir, Lindsay Davis, completely unbalanced, biased debate. Then they come back with Martha Raddatz going after JD, and JD has to say, "Do you hear yourself?" I mean, where does this supreme confidence combined with intellectual arrogance come from?
It comes from, and you and I have talked about this so many times, that our cultural curators in the media, but also in corporations, institutions, in government, in Hollywood, all live in the same super zip codes that of wealth and power. So they don't understand how the people that they cover or who want to buy their products, who sit in their seats, don't don't have the same experiences that they do. And they're so disconnected from our lives that they don't understand. They ridicule the things that we are concerned about. And it's incredibly troubling that we don't have an unvarnished press that looks at America without those prejudices going into the coverage.
Do you think I've known Mike Kaufman for 15 years? I campaigned with him when he was deployed in Iraq. I campaigned with his wife when he was deployed to Iraq, and they needed surrogates, so I went in there. Mike is a very interesting personality. He's been a never Trumper for a long time, since 2016. I didn't know he was now the mayor of Aurora. Of course, the mayor, who originally commented on the story, will take care of it, doesn't want the bad press for his city. But do you think Martha Raddatz has ever met Mike Kaufman? Do you think she's ever been to Aurora, Colorado?
If she has, it was just to fly over it or drive through it. If you are, I mean, one of the tenets of my coverage is if I'm going to talk about coal miners, then I've got to go into a coal mine, right? You've got to go where the people are to understand their concerns. And if you're not doing that, or if you're not sending a field staff to do that and they can communicate that to you, you're not going to cover it authentically and you're going to end up looking like you're looking down your nose at them.
So I think we're being, last question, Selena. I think the national elites have concluded that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the worst candidates for president and vice president in modern times and that they're going to lose. Who are they going to blame for this? Because they're not going to blame themselves, although I think they are, in fact, at fault for the Democratic Party's insular inability to understand what's going on in America. So I think they're to blame. But who do you think they are going to blame if she loses?
Oh, that's easy. The deplorables, the people that are the unwashed, the uneducated, the people that don't know any better, the ones that they need to send in and teach them how to really vote and really think. Now, obviously, I'm being sarcastic in terms of calling people deplorables. However, that's what I think they believe these voters are.
Well, Hillary used that term.
Yeah,
right?
Hillary did use that term, but this is how they actually feel about these voters, and they don't seem to understand that the voters that decide elections are the people they don't know, the people that live in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, all right, and
Who
in
actually go
Ohio.
hunting and fishing. Now, I want to close this. I don't know if you listen to Ruthless podcast. Do you listen to Ruthless, Selena?
Yeah.
They went fishing with J.D. Vance on Lake Michigan. It's a hilarious episode. They tried the old frozen fish deal, which I'm going to talk with Dwayne about because we used that with Tim Pawlenty when we went ice fishing with him 20 years ago. Fact of the matter, they have no idea that Tim Walz can't load a shotgun. I can't load a shotgun either. I'm not Mr. Shotgun. I don't own weapons. I don't go hunting. But I know when someone is faking it. And I think everybody in the media, in the legacy media, doesn't know when people are faking being Midwesterners.
Right. It's because they looked at that video and thought, oh my God, that's great. And I looked at video and I'm like, the only thing he's not doing wrong is putting his face in the barrel of the gun.
Well, they had people in front of the gun. You know, the one time I've been to the range with my brother-in-law, the safety instructions lasted about 30 minutes and the shooting lasted about 5. That's 10 years ago. And I'll tell you this right now, the gun safety measures that ought to accompany a hunter were not in evidence on that video.
No, that was really uncomfortable. I was really wondering what might happen. Yeah, it was not good.
Selena, always a pleasure. Thank you, my friend. Selena Zito, all of her work can be found at selenazito.com. And you can follow her on X at Zito Selena. She's on top of Pennsylvania. She's on top of the swing states. She knows exactly what's going on. Trust her, listen to her, follow her, selenazito.com. Thank you, Selena. This is a great week. It's going to be a great week, but it may be the only week that I have a voice because the Guardians are playing the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. The Guardians/Indians have not been in the ALCS since 2016, and this is a very interesting club. They're starting Alex Cobb, who wasn't with the club until the trade deadline, and has pitched like 4 games this year, but he's been pretty good. And who knows what Jose is going to do. I think Jose is going to explode, but that's just me. We will see. So this week, don't expect a lot because I'm going to be up late and screaming. However, I do want to do a second monologue today. Normally, I only do one monologue to open the show, but I want to do a second monologue today. There are national security voters out there. There are people who vote based upon the ability of the 2 candidates comparatively to be the commander-in-chief. And this morning, those national security voters will notice that China is blitzing Taiwan in a big way today. They've got the entire island surrounded. It's in reaction to the election of the new Taiwanese president who is giving speeches on Taiwan as an independent nation. So they're trying to scare him. Number one, we don't have anything to deal with that. Number two, Wall Street Journal Scale of Chinese spying overwhelms Western governments. The fact is, last month, the Federal Bureau of Investigation said a Chinese state-linked firm hacked 260,000 internet-connected devices, including cameras and routers in the United States. We are being overwhelmed by Chinese espionage. Xi Jinping. Then, the Wall Street Journal reported 2 days ago, mystery drones swarmed a U.S. military base for 17 days. The Pentagon is stumped. See, they're not allowed under federal law to shoot down those drones. I think that should change. Who's flying the drones and what are they looking for? And it's the drones over SEAL Team 6. It's the drones over our carrier construction. Drones like spy balloons are coming from one place. One place has the technology capable of doing that. It's our foes, our enemies in China, and we're not doing anything about it. Then finally we come to the New York Times revelation. You may remember I brought up the triad in 2015 in the GOP presidential debates. And the triad is America's three-legged nuclear deterrent. We have ballistic missile submarines under the seas. We have Minutemen missiles in the silos. And we have the B-2 and the B-52s. And I think we have B-1 left that carry nuclear weapons in the air. So air, sea, and land. 3 kinds of nuclear weapons, 3 kinds of delivery systems. And they're all older than dirt. Right? They're all basically Reagan-era deployed. So the New York Times, W.J. Hennigan was sent forth to spend 6 months studying the triad. Yes, really. He went to General Dynamics up in Connecticut. He went down to, he visited 23 different states to figure out what are we doing to modernize our nuclear weapons. And he went to Barksdale Air Force Base. He went to Northrop Grumman and Savannah River National Laboratory and Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay. He went on the west coast to Lawrence Livermore, up to Naval Base Kitsap in Washington State. He went to the Air Force Base in North Dakota, the Air Force Base in Minnesota, the Air Force Base in South Dakota. He went to Hill Air Force Base in Utah. He went up to General Dynamics Electric Boat in Connecticut. He went everywhere to discover that everything's got to be updated and we're behind schedule and it's going to cost a lot of money. He spent a lot of time talking about the Columbia-class submarine, which I'm glad. We need 12 of those in the water by 2040, and we're not on schedule, and we're spending a lot of money. Bottom line, though, he said it's going to cost $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Isn't that amazing? Do you know how much money Joe Biden spent in the first 3 months of his administration? $4 trillion. Did he spend any of it on weapons? No. Did he spend any of it on the industrial base? No. Unless you consider the electric car stations, refueling stations to be part of it. And the Green New Deal was in that first massive recovery act that we didn't need. Then came the Inflation Reduction Act, was in fact Inflation Inducing Act, which spent more money on Green New Deal stuff. And none of it, $7 trillion to $8 trillion of one-time spending by Team Biden and Team Harris, none of it went to defense. We're below 3% GDP spending on defense. And as a result, they're worried, for example, about the Y-12 National Security Complex in Oak Ridge. Now, my friend Schroeder probably wants to be a tour guide there. They obviously did not know that our uranium enrichment capacity has gone to near zero. They haven't listened to the Hugh Hewitt show. Dan Poneman, who ran Centrus for a few years, he's retired now, used to be DepSec of Energy under President Obama, would come on and routinely warn about the fact we don't have any uranium enrichment for weapons-grade uranium. We don't. And it's gone. And we've been reducing our ability to produce it, reducing our ability to deploy it. And that affects all of our nuclear weapons. Why do we need nuclear weapons? Because China is building a boatload of them in every kind of, now they're not very good at that. One of their nuke subs sunk last week. I pay attention to this. And so we are comfortably ahead for maybe 5 more years. Maybe 5 more years. Then they're going to have the same number of missiles, the same number of bombers, not yet the same number or class of submarines. We have a decided advantage under the water, but not unless we work hard at keeping it up. So there are national security voters out there. Some of them are supporters of the state of Israel. They note that Israel got whacked twice by Hezbollah this weekend after Joe Biden demanded of Netanyahu that he stop bombing Beirut. So we did. I mean, Israel did. We said, don't do it. Israel said, okay, we won't. And then Hezbollah got their breath and launched 2 devastating attacks on Israel over the weekend. People killed, people wounded, 1 military base, 1 civilian setting, no siren went off. And you got to wonder, why is Joe Biden telling Israel how to fight the war? He's been wrong for a year. They've been wrong since he went and visited Israel early afterwards. That's great. And then ever since then, it's been don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. They've been wrong every step of the way. So if you're generally a national security voter, maybe you're a member of the military or a veteran, I think it's going to be 70-30. I know there's some high-profile generals that do not like Donald Trump. I know that they have endorsed Kamala Harris. I would like to talk to them at length about their military men and women, and they've come up in the Pentagon where the chain of command is coherent, and usually some minimum amount of capacity is necessary to rise to flag rank, to be a general in the Army or the Marine Corps or the Air Force, or to be an admiral in the Navy. That isn't true about politics. You don't need any competence at all. I can line up for you 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats who should not be anywhere near a voting button in Congress. Matt Gaetz being exhibit number 1 and AOC being exhibit number 2. They're on both ends of the ideological spectrum in Congress, and they're knuckleheads. They have a knucklehead caucus, and I have a knucklehead caucus. And we got to deal with it. But they're never going to be president. Kamala Harris, for reasons which are unusual and rare, is in the position of maybe becoming president, and it is a national security nightmare. She does not have the capacity to do this. She does not have the ability to take in the information. She has very little experience with national security, if any. She sat around at a few meetings. Joe Biden had a lot of experience. He's been a terrible president, maybe the worst president in American history since the Civil War. And I'm here to tell you right now, she would be terrible. There is a silver lining for both parties. If Kamala Harris wins, the Republicans will have a romp in 2026 because we can't take day in, day out Kamala Harris. If you saw her at the church service over the weekend, I'll ask Dwayne to find that. We can't do that. She's campaigning, and by the way, in traditional. Why is Kamala Harris campaigning in the black church? Why? Because she's losing critical numbers of African American voters, especially black men. Why is Barack Obama yelling at black men? Why is he saying the brothers are a problem? Because they don't like Kamala Harris. The answer isn't because black men don't like black women. That's not the answer. The answer is they realize she is an extraordinarily weak candidate, a very weak presence. And either they know or they intuit that weakness is provocative on the world stage. And they look at Tim Walz and they say buffoon. Or as David Urban said on CNN, Elmer Fudd. Apparently Dana Bash never got to watch Looney Tune cartoons when she was growing up because she pretended to ask, who's Elmer Fudd? Maybe they said in her ear, you can't let that pass because then everyone will know that we know and the world knows that Elmer Fudd is Tim Walz. And so she pretended to be surprised by that. We are running against the least, we Republicans, I am a Republican, are running against the least competent ticket ever nominated in modern America, Harris Walz. We ought to win 50 states. I don't think we're going to. I think Trump is going to win. We ought to win 50 states if people are paying attention. But boy, what a bad week she had. You may have heard one clip of Kamala Harris in North Carolina yesterday. She was at the Koinonia Christian Center. Now, if you don't know that, you shouldn't know it unless you live in North Carolina or are a member of one of the 21 affiliated churches in the Koinonia Christian Center Church. It is not an AME church, okay? First African Methodist Episcopal Church, American Methodist Episcopal Church, is a traditionally African-American denomination with which I'm very familiar. Pastor Mark Whitlock is a friend of mine. He is the pastor of the largest AME congregation in the United States in Maryland. He and I go all the way back to the LA riots of 1992. We became friends. He had a church in Orange County that I would attend occasionally when he was pastoring there. And I know the AME denomination pretty well. I do not know the Koinonia Christian Center denomination. It's got 22 affiliates throughout the United States. I've never heard of Bishop Rosie O'Neill, but the church is led by a woman bishop, and so maybe that's why she started it. She started it in 1989 with just 7 members on the campus of East Carolina University, There are 2,500 members at this church. It's a primarily black church, not exclusively, I'm sure. And so this is the cut you probably heard, cut number 4.
Because what we see is so hard to see that we lose faith or a vision of those things we cannot see but must know.
All right, that's word salad, Kamala Harris. I have no idea. That's out of context, right? That's all that anyone saw, because that made the rounds yesterday on social media. Dwayne is busy cutting up her 10 minutes. She did. I want you to hear it all. I haven't heard it. He's getting it ready to play for you in the next segment. I'm doing this for one reason. I believe in context. I want, if you're Kamala Harris and you're at a black church and it's October in North Carolina, you're looking for a Hail Mary. You got to get black turnout up. You got to win North Carolina because you're losing in the upper Midwest, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Arizona looks bad. Nevada in some polls looks really bad. In other polls it looks good. People don't have any idea what's going on. My theory of the case is they have terrible, terrible projected results. So the only way they can get close is to make sure they get turnout in the African American community that is at least equal to 20. Got Barack Obama berating black men. That's not going to work. I'm just here to tell you, I cannot wait to hear the whole thing. We're going to play it for you next segment. I want to remind everyone of 2 things. One, we have a great sponsor in besthotgrill.com. Our friend Rhett Rasmussen, United States Naval Academy, class of 1982. I got the class right finally. But that's not why Rhett's on. Rhett's on because he owns and operates, along with Irene, besthotgrill.com. in California. It is the best grill made in America. I have 2 of them in California and in the Beltway. And they are fabulous, fabulous grills. The Solaire infrared grill, it's just amazing. It produces the best barbecue you could possibly want, the best grilling you could possibly want, because it's Solaire infrared technology. They also do fireplace logs and fireplace balls. Visit besthotgrill.com to find out why. But I'm here to tell you, try it before you buy it is unusual in the grilling world. Grills are expensive, but Rhett wants you to be 100% happy, so they offer try it before you buy it. But if you're looking for the perfect Christmas gift for your best clients, I begin to tell you this now, go and get their smallest grill and give them that. Everybody loves to tailgate, unless you're a Browns fan. Not so much fun this year. But if you're any other kind of a fan, if you're a Guardians fan, you love to tailgate. And a Best Hot Grill small version is the best one made. It's the best Christmas present you could possibly give to your best clients. I always want to remind people of that. Now, food for the poor. You have been very, very generous. 800,000 Floridians still lack power. Many have lost their homes. Many have suffered damages beyond. The flooding was very bad. The tornadoes were very bad. Food for the poor is there, just like Food for the Poor is in North Carolina and East Tennessee. Food for the Poor has been partnered with us for years. They sponsor campaigns whenever there's a disaster that they can help with. They don't put up their hands for every disaster, but their headquarters are in Florida. They were shipping stuff to North Carolina and Tennessee before Milton came ashore. Please go to HughHewitt.com and be generous. Yesterday, Vice President Harris campaigned at a church in North Carolina. It's a predominantly black church. Koinonia Christian Center is in, I believe, Greenville. It is its own denomination. It was founded by a woman, Bishop Rosie, and 8 seconds of Kamala Harris have been flying around the internet because she looked terrible in it. Word salad. Let's play the 8 seconds first, cut number 4.
Because what we see is so hard to see that we lose faith or a vision of those things we cannot see but must know.
All right, so that makes no sense. She has teleprompter. Let's listen to her entire presentation. It's only 10 minutes at church yesterday. Here is the Vice President at the Koinonia Christian Center.
Good afternoon, church. Good afternoon. Oh, please have a seat. Please have a seat. Bishop O'Neill, I thank you so very much. We've had some time to visit before we came out into the sanctuary, and I just thank you for the leadership that you have provided for so long. You know, in times of crisis, and we're looking at the images of the aftermath of the hurricane, but it is easy in these moments of crisis to question our faith, to sometimes lose our faith for a moment, because what we see is so hard to see
that we lose faith or a vision of those things we cannot see but must know. And you are such a leader in all of those ways, and I thank you. I'm honored to be with you. I'm honored to be with you. I'm honored to be with you. Thank you. And KCC family, thank you for welcoming me today. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to allow me to worship with you. It does my heart and soul good. So Scripture teaches us, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. So I first encountered the words of Galatians as a young girl at 23rd Avenue Church of God in Oakland, California, which is where I sang in the children's choir, and first learned the teachings of the Bible. My earliest memories of those teachings are about a loving God. A God who asks us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, to defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And so at an early age, I learned that faith is a verb. It is something we show in action and in service. And we show it by heeding the words of my pastor, who Bishop spoke with yesterday, Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown, who often invokes the words that we all know. One must do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. That truth is important at all times, and especially in moments of difficulty and disaster, especially in moments like this, as we navigate storms that have inflicted so much harm across our country, and to all those who have loved ones who have been affected by Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene. Doug and I, my husband, are holding all of you close in our hearts and in our prayers. And we are thinking of everyone who has been affected by these storms. Now, I know Helene's impact was further west, but I also know that the people of Greenville, like all Americans, have been inspired by the way communities are coming together, Bishop, in the wake of these storms. Amid ruined homes, downed power lines, swollen rivers that have been choked with debris, we have seen children rescued by neighbors in a kayak. We have seen those who have lost everything gathering donations for others. You know, it's been my experience to see that in a moment of crisis. Isn't it something when you know that often it is the people who have the least give the most, right? Moments of crisis, I believe, do have a way of revealing the heroes among us, the angels among us, and of showing us all the best of who we are. And these hurricanes have revealed heroes around all of us. Heroes who do not ask the injured or stranded, whether they are a Republican or a Democrat, but who simply ask, are you okay? Who ask, what can I do to help? Heroes who, as I like to say, see in the face of a stranger, a neighbor. Yet, church, there are some who are not acting in the spirit of community. And I am speaking of those who have been literally not telling the truth, lying about people who are working hard to help folks in need, spreading disinformation when the truth and facts are required. And the problem with this, beyond the obvious, is it's making it harder then to get people life-saving information if they're led to believe they cannot trust. And that's the pain of it all, which is the idea that those who are in need have somehow been convinced that the forces are working against them in a way that they would not seek aid. And let's let that sink in for a moment. Right now, fellow Americans are experiencing some of the most difficult moments in their lives. Yet instead of offering hope, there are those who are channeling people's tragedies and sorrows into grievance and hatred. And one may ask why, and I think sadly, frankly, the motives are quite transparent. To gain some advantage for themselves. To play politics with other people's heartbreak, and it is unconscionable. Now is not a time to incite fear. It is not right to make people feel alone. That is not what, and this is a church full of leaders, that is not what leaders as we know do in crisis. Now is the time to bring folks together, to come together, to be there for one another, and follow the example of all of the heroes all around us. And now is the time to live up to the fundamental values that reflect our nation at its best. The values of compassion and community and honesty and decency. The values that define the people of Greenville, the people of North Carolina, and the people like a fellow who I met recently. His name is Eddie Hunnell. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about Eddie Hunnell. So I met him in Charlotte the other week. He was visiting Grassy Creek for his son's wedding when he saw a woman in the raging floodwaters. First, he tried to rescue her by canoe. When that didn't work, this man, perfect stranger, he's watching. He jumped in the river and pulled her ashore. And when I talked with Eddie about his act of courage, here's what he said to me. He said, well, I didn't feel I had a choice. But of course he had a choice. Of course he had a choice. But his choice was to take a risk for the sake of another. Didn't even reflect on the risk he might have been taking, right? His choice was to follow his conscience. His choice was, in the words of Isaiah, to be a refuge for the needy in their distress. He chose to remember that we are all in this together. And if that is true during a terrible storm, it is also true when the storm passes. It is true in our everyday lives. When Paul wrote his letter to the church in Galatia, he knew folks might feel the weight of the burden of doing good, that they may feel a temptation to turn away from others in their time of need, to believe, what does it matter? But Paul reminded them and us that God calls us not to become weary of doing good. Because we each have the power. God tells us this. The power, each one of us, to make a difference. And that tells us that the measure of our strength will be clear when we see what we can do to lift other people up. Just as Eddie did, and as the heroes and the angels in this church and all over are doing after these storms across North Carolina, Florida, and impacted communities, we are witnessing faith in action. So I close with this. Let us continue to look in the face of a stranger and see a neighbor. Let us recognize that when we shine the light in moments of darkness, it will guide our feet onto the path of peace. And let us always remember that while weeping may endure for a night, joy cometh in the morning. Thank you. May God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you, church.
All right, now, that was a total of 10 minutes. The beginning was awful. The end was awful. In between was good. She had a good teleprompter. She worked in a good message to a Christian congregation about Christian virtues. She quoted Galatians. She quoted Isaiah. She quoted Micah without referencing Micah. What does the Lord God require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your Lord? My question is, every speech has got bad moments in it. My question is, why is she at a black church in North Carolina with 23 days left to go? Because that's not an ordinary. It's not because she's doing disaster relief. It's not, the disaster is not there. It's because she needs to turn out her base vote, and they are not turning out. I wanted to play the whole thing because I'm fair. I'm fair. I do not think she has any gifts at all in communicating off prompter. And when she was off prompter at the beginning end, she was terrible. When she was on prompter, it was fine. But I also learned that she went to Sunday school in Oakland at an Assembly of God. It sounded like pretty conservative. We need more. We need more deep dives into this. The faith of Kamala Harris. We need to know if that was just ghostwritten or if she actually really believes that. Never heard her talk about her faith before. What do you think? Times of Israel reported yesterday the Israeli Defense Forces haven't hit Beirut in recent days following Biden request of Netanyahu. Then yesterday we had 2 drone attacks with dozens injured and some in danger of losing their life, and another rocket attack this morning by Hezbollah that hit a car in Carmel. I don't know where that is. It's in northern Israel. Why is Joe Biden trying to do the Lyndon Johnson thing and dictate targets to Israel?
I really don't understand. So actually, 4 young men, all of them were 19 years old, died yesterday in the drone attack on the IDF headquarters, IDF base in northern Israel also. But it's inexplicable to me why Israel is listening, because every time they have not listened, the war has gone better. And when they were limited into, for example, going into Rafah, that was the biggest mistake of the war. And that was because of the Biden administration. So I I am hoping that they are listening to they are buying agreement for a larger Iran strike, and maybe they're getting ready to do that after Yom Kippur. That was on Saturday. But it's really inexplicable to me why the Biden administration is still dictating terms of this war to the Israelis.
Now, we don't know what's going on, but we saw a parallel story that the United States will be sending 100 soldiers and a THAAD battery, that's a high altitude missile defense program, to Israel to deploy. Do you think a deal was made? I'll give you a THAAD if you don't hit Beirut?
It's possible. I mean, the Iran missile launches, there have been now 2 of them, were miraculous in that they didn't actually do significant damage. In both instances, the only people that they killed were actually Arab Palestinians, in a horrifying bit of irony. But they were miraculous, and I think that the Israelis understand that miracles are not unlimited in this genre of life. But I wouldn't put it past them to make that agreement, your safety and security in exchange for sacrificing your safety and security.
Well, since 2006 in the last Lebanon war, I have been routinely warned by Michael Oren that the Hezbollah missile inventory is more than 150,000. Many of them are guided and precise. And obviously, yesterday's attack on the military base shows that's true. It seems to me Israel doesn't have a choice, Bethany. They've got to wage the war that they need to wage in Lebanon to win and destroy Hezbollah. Is that a consensus view as far as you understand it in Israel?
So I've had a lot of conversations with Jonathan Conricus. He's the former IDF spokesman, and he has agreed with Michael Oren on the stockpile that Hezbollah is setting on. It is terrifying, the prospect of being involved in this war. The United Nations was tasked for the last 2 decades with limiting Hezbollah's ability to wage war in Israel, and they neglected to do so, even though that was literally their entire mandate. But I think the Israelis have come to understand that they have no choice. They have to go into this war, just like they had to go into a war that they didn't want in Gaza, because ultimately, this is the safety and security of the Jewish state. Right now, there are tens of thousands of Israelis who their houses have been destroyed and they can't return to them in northern Israel. They can't cede that territory forever. And so eventually this threat has to be neutralized.
So, Bethany, generally speaking, if they go to all-out war in Lebanon, parts of 4 Israeli divisions are now in southern Lebanon. They're moving very slowly. Do you think American Jewry will support that?
I mean, American Jewry is a pretty wide swath. There's American Jews who are like Doug Emhoff's daughter, who are fundraising for basically Hamas. She's fundraising for front organizations that are Hamas, linked to Hamas. You have that wing, and then you have more right-wing Jews, both religiously and politically, like myself. Um, there will never be a consensus among American Jews, but I think that there is a growing understanding for Jews for whom the Jewish state matters, that this is a fight that unfortunately has to be fought.
So I want to bring it down to politics and then take you into the break. I am predicting that if Kamala Harris wins, I don't think she's going to, but if she does, she'll be the most anti-Israel president since the Jewish state was founded in 1948. Do you agree with my assessment, or do you think I'm premature in making that assertion?
115%, I agree. She would be Obama
Why?
on steroids.
Why do you think that?
If you look at the staff that she's surrounding herself with every both sides statement that she has made about this conflict, it matters how Israel conducts itself in this war. Well, if you look at what John Spencer, the West Point urban warfare expert, has said, Israel has conducted this war unlike any other country in world history, in that they have limited civilian casualties to the lowest possible numbers. And of course, there are innocents who have died in Gaza, and I'm not discounting that, but that's war. That's what happens in war. And Kamala Harris seems to think that there is a way to fight a war in which there is no collateral damage, and that is a fantasy land that she's only requiring of the Jewish state, nowhere else in the world.
Because, Bethany, we are now in short strokes times. We are getting close to the vote. And in fact, people are voting all across the country. The Latino vote is breaking very favorably for Donald Trump compared to past. The New York Times this morning. The black vote is not turning out. President Obama is yelling at black men. Last week, a week ago, President Trump was on my show and he said, I think I should get a lot of Jewish votes. I mean, why in the world wouldn't I? Except, of course, there's some Jews in the anti-Israel demonstrations. I told him those were outliers, and we had a little chat about that. What do you understand to be the likelihood of an increased Jewish American vote for Trump by the close of counting of votes on November 5?
So I don't have high hopes for my community, unfortunately, on that front. But I will say that in the states where it matters, Pennsylvania and Ohio, I think, are the two biggest Jewish communities where their votes actually count, unlike here in Maryland. Those communities have seen an expansion of more right-leaning Jews who are both, again, more religiously right-leaning and also more politically right-leaning. And so, I mean, Donald Trump is correct that the Jewish vote could determine the presidency in those states. And I am cautiously optimistic about the Jewish vote in those states. On the Upper West Side of Manhattan, I'm not so cautious, but thankfully that vote doesn't matter. But I think in Ohio and Pennsylvania, there is a shot for the Jewish vote, not being stupid for once.
I would also add, in the suburbs of Detroit, there is a large Jewish American population. I know because I was often a guest of different members of that congregation when I lived there, or that community when I lived there in the early 80s. Let me ask you though, do you think that we might have the effect of American Jews not saying that they're going to vote for Trump and then voting for Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's happened literally everywhere. People are sort of whisper. It's funny, here in my community in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is super duper left leaning, there are a lot of Hogan signs for Senate. And I think that those folks that is a stand-in for I'm voting Republican on the ticket, but all but one person in this community is too afraid to put up a Trump lawn sign. So I'm driving around and I'm seeing the Hogan lawn signs are really numerous here in Silver Spring, Maryland, which again could not be more left leaning. And so I do think that there is an understanding among Jews that we have friends in one party and you have to fight the tide in another.
So last night we had a farewell dinner for our friends up here because we're leaving this week now that the North American Wife Carrying Championship is over. That's an annual event on Columbus Day in Maine. I don't know if you're aware of that. I suppose Seth could compete. I would recommend to you the videos. But we were having dinner last night talking about the election, and I said, I have no idea. Nobody has any idea. Nobody knows what the turnout model is going to be. I think that's the fair admission that nobody has any idea. Do you agree with me, Bethany, or do you have a sense Trump is winning?
I do have a sense that Trump is winning. I'm looking at the Kamala Harris campaign and I'm seeing the flailing that's happening, both on the part of her and Tim Walz. There's a desperation that did not exist 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. That I think that they're seeing internal polling that's making them feel worried. As of now, obviously anything can change. 3 weeks is a lifetime, it feels like, in this country and in these news cycles. But as of right now, I think the tide is behind President Trump.
Okay, last question. Yesterday, the vice president went to a largely black church in Greenville, North Carolina, and gave a 10-minute address that referenced Isaiah and Micah and Galatians and was very biblical from the pulpit at a large black church. I have no problem with that whatsoever. It was actually one of her better speeches. It was on prompter. She only messed up at the beginning and the end when she freelanced it. So it was a pretty good basic message about caring for people in times of crisis. If Donald Trump gave a 10-minute message at Robert Jeffress's Baptist Church in Dallas, would we be hearing about Christian nationalism? And why aren't we hearing about worries about separation of church and state when Kamala Harris does it?
Because it serves her ends, because I think she understands that in that community, she's at risk of losing some votes because she's done this crazy thing where she wants responsibility for what FEMA is doing, even though FEMA has completely missed the boat on helping folks after Helene in that area. But it's funny because neither of them are particularly Christian. Neither of them are faithful people. But yeah, you're absolutely right that he would be accused of Christian nationalism and, I'm sure white nationalism as well. I mean, every kind of nationalism, because Donald Trump is, the largest threat to our democracy. And that's why we had to nominate someone undemocratically in order to face off against him.
Yeah, I'm surprised, Bethany. I thought you were going to mention your book there. You're the co-author of Stolen Youth. I think she's in trouble in the African-American community, especially the church-going African-American, because she supported, as Attorney General, transgender surgery for all inmates in California prisons. That's the ad Donald Trump ran in the Eagles-Browns game yesterday. It's the ad I've seen the most, where she talks about getting men transition surgery and paying for it. I don't think that flies in the black community. Do you?
No, I don't. It's interesting. We were talking about Detroit earlier. I did a lot of reporting about the Muslim community, and it's ironic that I was set to go to print. I was in the final copy edit stages on October 7th of a piece about how the Muslim community is shifting to the right, and obviously October 7th put a halt on any political evolution in that community. But in states like Michigan, that really counts for a lot. And I've been watching the social media of all the people that I interviewed, all of those experts and all of those community leaders, and they feel on Gaza that there's pretty much no difference between Kamala and Trump. And so that's sort of a wash for them. But they're seeing that issue radicalize their community because, in a place like Montgomery County, Maryland, where I live, they've forced parents to allow their children to participate in these LGBTQ struggle sessions in public schools, and they won't let their children opt them out. And so parents in other states, like in Michigan, are seeing that, and they're seeing like this is the way the wind is blowing for liberals. They're going to force my kids to be reading Pride Puppy in kindergarten, and they're voting accordingly. And I think that we're going to see actually some surprising numbers out of Arab Americans, especially in states that it matters, like Michigan.
Oh, I pointed out to the former president on Monday, the Arab American Institute has it 41% for Trump, 1 point ahead of Kamala Harris in Michigan among Arab Americans in Michigan. It's a stunning thing. I appreciate the extra time, Bethany, this morning. I know you're busy on Monday morning, but thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here.
I'm going to ask Jim Garrity right now for his prediction on the Yankees Guardians series, because I'm going to be up late every night yelling. Jim, what do you think?
You're going to be in trouble, Hugh. New York will win. That's just my default answer for everything: football, baseball, everything like that. And the problem is because they're called the Guardians. They should have picked a better name. I understand.
Jim,
There was a yes.
are you a Yankees fan? You've never mentioned this before. This
I
might be
am a
like
very
a triple
casual Yankee fan.
disqualification. You are a
Yes,
Yankees fan.
unfortunately. So I grew 1986. The Mets win the World Series. Mookie Wilson, the Tuffle Shuffle, and I'm a Mets fan. A couple years later, they have the Bad Boy team where David Cohn is squirting bleach at people. Vince Coleman threw a firecracker and blinded a girl in one eye. They were the Bad Boys. They were probably all high on cocaine, and I couldn't be a Mets fan anymore. And the Yankees had my dad's all-time favorite player, Don Mattingly. So I became usually it's Jets and Mets. It's all Long Islanders or New Jerseyans who are affiliate. That's how your team affiliation starts, and usually it's a Giants Yankees fan. I became a very casual Yankee fan, and the great thing about being a Yankee fan is you don't even pay attention till the postseason. As far
Okay,
as I'm concerned,
I want you to
100
I want to pitch to you a special edition of the editors. You and Rich Lowry against Annie McCarthy, and invite Chris Christie as your guest because he's a Mets fan too. So we have two Yankees fans and two Mets fans.
All right.
Do you think the Mets fans are rooting for the Guardians, or do they want to play the Yankees?
Oh, I think I'd love a Subway Series. Like these are the rivals you love to hate. By the way, Phil Klein is a Yankee fan and Charlie Cook are a Yankee fan, and they follow the sport much more than I do. So there are better people to have on a baseball-focused podcast than I am.
All right. Now let me get to the question of the day. Kamala Harris. First, the setup. We have just come out of the year of dire warnings about Christian nationalism. Tim Alberta's book, John Ward's book, many think pieces about the rise of Christian nationalism. I think it's all kind of silly. But you're aware, I'm sure you're aware of that strain of writing. Christian nationalism is on the rise and it's dangerous. Kamala Harris goes yesterday to the Koinonia Christian Church in Greenville, North Carolina, and gives a 10-minute sermon full of Isaiah, Micah, Galatians. It's a nice message. It's one of her better speeches on the campaign trail. Does anyone worry about the establishment of church and state going away and the rise of Christianity in the public square when she does that, Jim Garrity?
Hugh, once you label it secular humanism, it stops being a religion, and therefore anything it does is okay. I mean, that's the mindset of a whole bunch of these people. We don't necessarily worry about left-wing Christian nationalism, but look, there is as ardent a worldview. There is as ardent a desire to implement a moral worldview. Patrick Ruffini, right before we started this conversation, was tweeting out new data showing that Trump is ahead of Harris among Catholic voters. And he said, when you make your entire campaign about abortion, it has consequences. There are a whole bunch of Catholics out there. Are probably a whole bunch of Catholics out there who are not down the line pro-lifers. And as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. This is a messy issue that makes people feel conflicted feelings, particularly on the hard cases: rape, incest, life of the mother. But there are also people who don't like the idea of abortion without limit, and they certainly don't like the idea of taxpayer funding for abortion. And when the Democratic Party, so I'm coming to you not from my usual background, as you've noticed. I am in Kohler, Wisconsin.
I did notice that.
The Bradley Impact Fund is having its conference. I'm joining them for a few days. I would say more, but apparently, if I say more, an assassin will dive out of the ceiling vent and take me out. So it's all off the record. But otherwise, really good folks. You should check them out. I was in Bucks County this past weekend. This is part of my unofficial, unplanned swing state tour for October. And Bucks County was just nonstop Trump signs. I don't know if that means Trump's going to win. And I should point out, Trump lost Bucks County in 2016 by something like a little less than 3,000 votes. Lost it by 16,000 votes in 2020. This is really important swing state suburban territory. This is where if you don't have to win it if you're a Republican, but you got to keep it close. When the abortion was on the Democrat local candidates' yard signs. That's the message. Abortion. I'll preserve a woman's right to choose. Preserve your right to an abortion. This is front and center in their messaging. And I'm sure they see it in the focus groups and they convince themselves that there are a whole bunch of people it helps. But when people say, oh, the women's vote, you notice the women's vote when it's married is much more pro-Republican, much more pro-Trump, much more traditional values. Generally, when people say the women's vote, it's shorthand for the single women's vote. And that is the demographic that goes gangbuster for abortions. Unfortunately,
Jim, yesterday in the Browns-Eagles game yesterday, there were 3 Kamala Harris ads, all of them in part about abortion, and 1 Trump ad, which featured Kamala Harris talking about how she is proud of providing transgender transition surgery to California inmates, including a man who was convicted of a very gruesome murder. I think that's why she's in the black church 4 weeks before the election, is that the black church is a very
We certainly
conservative church.
Yeah. We can see a consistent pattern. Do you think it's coincidental that this is coming out at the same time Barack Obama is letting black men know that he's disappointed in them again? And I'm sure if you're, look, I'm not an African American man, so I don't want to, pretend I know what somebody else is feeling. But as behalf of, all other kinds of Americans, how many times has Barack Obama told us we've let him down? We haven't lived up to his expectations. He expects more from us. The disappointed dad, which I think a lot of people find condescending and a lot of people find not all that convincing or persuasive. By the way, when they point about like the argument that you're going to hear more and more in these closing weeks, that the reason she can't close the sale and the reason she is neck and neck in these 7 swing states that are going to determine everything, they're going to tell you that it's sexism. Because they can't say it's racism. If they say it's racism, like, well, this is pretty much the same electorate that elected Barack Obama twice. How are we, getting to that point? They're going to say it's sexism. And I noticed that the International Association of Firefighters has endorsed every single Democratic presidential candidate going back to Walter Mondale, except for 2. Now, Hugh, you're a smart guy. I bet you can name which 2.
George McGovern and Kamala Harris?
Good guess. No, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. What do they have in common?
Oh, did they endorse George McGovern?
McGovern was back to Mondale, so McGovern would have been before that.
Oh, okay. So it's prior to that. Jim, I got to jump the line here.
84. Okay.
I want, if you'll stay during the second segment or the off-air segment, I'll play that and put it on YouTube. I got to play just a little bit of Lulu Garcia Navarro, about whom I know nothing, interviewing J.D. Vance for the New York Times for tone more than substance. Let's play cut number 5.
The reason that there is a housing crisis is that not enough houses have been built.
And that we have 25 million people who shouldn't be here.
Well, I mean, this is the thing.
I think it's both.
I know you do. I don't think that many people who look into this agree with you, but about 1/3 of the construction workforce in this country is Hispanic. Of those, a large proportion are undocumented. So how do you propose to build all the housing necessary that we need in this country by removing all the people who are working in construction?
Well, I think it's a
Stop.
fair
The
question.
answer, JD eviscerates her. But Jim, how do you describe that tone?
So I'm now a semi-regularly appearing on Chris Wallace's program, and Lulu is on it. And off air, we get along. We had a very interesting agreement where she and I agreed on how the police treated the receiver for the Miami Dolphins, and the other 2 panelists, including my good friend Rayhan Salam, disagreed. And so it's kind of fascinating. So everyone now and then will agree. That having been said, I notice how quickly it goes from a significant portion of the workforce is undocumented immigrants to how are you going to build houses by taking away all the people who build houses? There's a little bit of like rhetorical sleight of hand here. Also, the blurring of the line between the number of people who work in construction who are Hispanic and the number of people who work in construction who are illegal immigrants. Now, I guess the term they prefer is undocumented. We have to say it's
well. The thing that got me is she said people who study this issue don't agree with you.
Yeah,
that's simply not true. I was a land use lawyer for 27 years. People agree with J.D. Vance.
I get into these arguments all the time with people, and they'll say, "I saw on the internet." I'm like, "Where?" Right? Look, I'm much more likely to be persuaded if you point me to, all throughout the Morning Jolt, everything I write for National Review, as often as I can in the Washington Post, I put in links to the direct sources, and you can evaluate them for yourself. Pick your sources very carefully. The number of times you see something on social media, Twitter, Facebook, anything like that, and it doesn't have a link for you to go and check to say who that's coming from. People who I'm sure there are people who study housing who say, yes, J.D. Vance is full of nonsense. They may work for a very progressive think tank. They may work for a very progressive university. Their other study might be why Donald Trump has fangs and horns and is going to destroy the country. And if somebody says something like that, you look a little less. They seem a little less.
Yeah, talk to the National Association of Home Builders. Go to the California Builders Association. There are 1,000 different organizations that represent people who build homes, and none of them think that the ability to build homes will be compromised by a tough immigration policy. None of them. Now, Jim, I have no predictions to make about who's going to win this because I made predictions in 2016. I was very wrong. But Donald Trump thought he was going to lose in 2016. I think it sounds like Kamala Harris thinks she's going to lose. Do you think that that's what we're hearing?
All right. So midweek of last week, I wrote a morning jolt entire. The vibe has shifted, and the Democratic anxiety is taking place, and they tell us not to read the comments, but there are a whole bunch. Oh, Jim, they're just reporting what you want to hear. You're believing. You're falling for spin. This is why people listen to your to where you are, Hugh, because I'll talk about things that are in today's morning newsletter that have not been sent off to the editor yet. So besides the the three polls this weekend that had Trump either closing, the best one for her was ABC, where she's up 2, and Hillary was up 2 in the national popular vote, and she lost the electoral college. You see Mika Brzezinski's monologue on Friday?
I did not.
Okay. There's this fear that Donald Trump is poised for victory. I think it's fair for Democrats to be incredibly depressed. I think it's fair for them to be discouraged, right? Politico writes, an anxious Democrat's guide to a coin toss election. Maureen Dowd says, where is the fierce urgency of beating Trump? Ezra Klein telling his readers, ignore the polls. The Pod Save America guys, who I know you're a huge fan of, they tell their episode why you shouldn't panic about the polls. Like, whether or not Democrats should panic, the tone is panic. And the reason for that, and the thing is, look, we're 3 weeks from the election. Harris has had, in their minds, a great convention. They think the Walz pick worked out great. I think you can now say it really didn't. I think he's actually kind of a spaz. You could point to the debate where I think Harris won. I think they're doing the ads they want to do. She's got 3 times as much money, 3 times as many campaign offices, 3 times as many staffers and volunteers. She should be winning by a huge margin, and she's not.
All right, I got to get one last question in, Jim.
Sure.
There are 2 Doug Emhoff stories. I have not discussed either of them on air because they're poorly sourced and they don't meet my standards. My question is not about the stories. It's about awareness of the stories in the electorate. What percentage of Americans do you think are aware of either or both of those stories?
Let's say a third, 30%, 40%, something in that window. But look, if there's anything we've learned over the years, Hugh, it's that people who work in Hollywood are endlessly respectful to women and would never allow that kind of behavior. It's totally not normal. Everyone who works in Hollywood has nothing but the most respectful, kind, and feminist attitudes when they write their.
I think it's a much higher percentage than a third, but it's very interesting. No person who depends upon sourcing things to a credible organization has talked about it, but it's everywhere. We are living in an age of unsourced allegations. Tell Lulu if she wants to know anything about housing, she can call me.
Jen Psaki told us that Doug Emhoff is the new paradigm of masculinity. That this is the role model.
I guess we'll leave it there. Jim, enjoy if you see Marin Stremecki today, tell him I said hello and have a good time in Wisconsin. Bring back news.
Quality time with the nanny. What was that song? Smack my bee up. Anyway, I don't want to
going to go there.
I don't want trouble. Yes,
Not going there. Thank you, Jim Garrity. I want to begin this segment. Shelley Moore Capito, Senator from West Virginia, will join me in 1 minute. But I want to remind you, if you're going to be involved in this campaign, go out to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Every single swing state has an American for Prosperity organization in it. AFP does great work, americanforprosperity.org. Senator Capito, do you work with them at all, with Americans for Prosperity?
Sure. I mean, we want to make sure it's a grassroots campaign all the way through, and they do a great job. Americans Prosperity do a good job here and a good job across the country.
I agree completely. Now, Senator, I'm really hoping we win the Senate because I want you to chair Environment and Public Works, because we do have a housing shortage in America, and a lot of it is at the feet of the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and state and local regulatory agencies. Do you think the American people know that's why we can't get houses built in the numbers that we need?
Actually, I don't think the American people know that. I don't think they know how long it takes to get a permit, how agencies work against one another. or don't work in coordination, and it lengthens the timelines and expense. And so people give up, investors give up, developers give up. I think it's very difficult, in our state of West Virginia, because we have so many streams, we have wetlands, we have all kinds of other challenges, and it just stymies development. And so I think permitting is absolutely critical, and that comes through EPW. But I also think this regulatory environment on the fish and wildlife side and EPA side is where we see it the most in committee. And it is very, very much a roadblock to any kind of development, and housing is one of those.
I also want you to run Environment and Public Works because I think nuclear power comes through your committee. And if we don't build a whole bunch of nuclear power plants soon, the new ones, we are going to fall behind in AI because we do not have the baseload electricity to support AI and supercomputing. Does the construction of civil nuclear power plants come before your committee in any sort of way?
Yes, absolutely they do, Hugh. And I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, just recently, over the past year, we did get a bill called the Advance Act through Congress all the way to the president's desk. And what it does is incentivizes and works through some of the exactly roadblocks that we talked about earlier on nuclear and advanced nuclear. These are the small modular nuclear reactors. It's not the nuclear power of old, and they are much more they're smaller. They can power an industrial complex. They can power a city. They could power an AI, data centers, whatever. And so this is to move that through the permitting with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's also, interestingly enough, in the areas where we live, is to take some of these old coal-fired power plants and site nuclear on those, because you have transmission already there. It's a brownfield. And a lot of the permitting obstacles are eliminated because of that. So this is to spur that development. And also, I think it's important as a national security issue that we in the United States have the superiority here in the technologies and also the development of these, not just here, but worldwide. So I'm excited about what we can see on nuclear power, and it does come right through my committee.
Now, what's very interesting to me is if the Republicans get back the majority, I expect you're going to chair Environment and Public Works, and Susan Collins will chair Appropriations. I don't think Leader McConnell wants to go back there. I don't know. That's inside baseball. But two of our senior women senators in the United States Senate will be chairing committees. So the big question is the Republican effort going to succeed? You're going to get the 51 or more, Senator Capito.
Well, as you know, and I think you talked to Governor Justice maybe last week. He is on track, I think, to become, last week. He is on track to be number 50. Senator Manchin's moving out. We will have a change in party here. And I think that's nothing's a done deal in politics, but that's pretty close. And so we're looking at Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan. All these other states, I think, are very close. I think Montana is felt to be moving in the right direction, consistently moving. So we're very optimistic about that. So I'm optimistic, but I've been in this business long enough to know you can't count your chickens before they hatch. And so that means you have to keep pressing it all the way through to the end. And that's what we're going to do. So yes, I do think we will take over. I do think we'll preserve the filibuster, which I think is critical. And I do think we're going to be able to really look at some of these agencies like EPA and others that have just been pouring money into causes and useless, I think, endeavors at the bidding of the administration.
On a couple of occasions when Senator Blunt was there, I would come and address the Republican conference in the Senate. And you sat next to me at the last time I did that. We ended up talking about name, image, and likeness for an hour, and I just saw some eyes rolling among non-football fans. What does the conference do, and why do you want to run it?
Well, I want to run it because it's basically, and I am running for that leadership position. I want to be able to be the person who controls everybody getting a chance to talk. I mean, you read that there's disgruntlement within the Republican conference. I really don't think there is. I think that the process has gotten so disassembled from what it could be and should be that I think as the leader of the conference, that would be something that that I could have influence on. And actually, I'm running for the policy chair, so it's the same thing. It's the person that really leads the effort to get us together in terms of where we're going policy wise, having all the voices heard, having amendments, pressing leadership for that. There's going to be a change, you know that. And so I think now's the time to be talking about these kinds of things.
So here's the most important question, and I've asked it on air and off of presidential candidates. If the House stays Republican and the Senate majority shifts to Republicans, there will be a chance to do a budget and get a reconciliation and get a big swing. Do you have a plan? Do you think that the Republican Senate has a plan on what to ask for? I would ask, for example, condition federal spending on education on vouchers existing, like West Virginia has a great voucher program. Or I would do permit reform, or I would cut back the federal, but anything. Is there a big plan for the first reconciliation?
Well, here's the good news for someone like you who understands the policies and how you move forward with having a budget and then reconciliation. Is we have been tasked over the last several months before we came home to work through our committees and to work through our different responsibilities to present such a plan to leadership and to the conference. And so these plans are in, on finance. I know Senator Crapo's been working on certainly on tax reform, permitting in my committee. And I think certainly the budget committee has been looking for ways to try to make the spending decisions that we make in Congress make a lot more sense. So do we have a final plan? No. But do we have a lot of plans, sort of throw everything in and then see what can be done and how far we could go? Absolutely. We are prepared. We are going to be prepared for January and the likelihood that what you say happens, a Republican president and House and Senate. And I think you can rest assured that we're not going to wait till that day to decide what we're going to do. Those decisions are already.
That is great news. All right, last question, because it comes up every single day. I talked to Senator Lankford through the whole immigration reform debate. I know he did his best in the negotiations, but I always said if they don't build the wall, it's just not going to happen. I'm a border hawk and a regularization dove. What do you think? How do you react whenever you hear Kamala Harris saying Donald Trump called up the conference and killed it? Because that's not what happened.
That is absolutely not what happened. And James Lankford, he was talking to all of us all the way through this. The bill got much bigger than what it needed to be in terms of being able to get a bipartisan consensus. But the thing that just racks me about this whole decision is, and that the vice president could sit there and say, well, the only reason the problem is at the border is because we didn't pass a bill 5 months ago. She's been sitting there at the helm of this for 3.5 years. If it was so painful, the 10 million people would not have gotten in. Now we see criminals that are coming in. We see gang developments in some of our cities. None of this would have occurred, regardless of what happened with that bill, if they had not been more aggressive from the very beginning. It's obvious to me their plan from the beginning was to open the border, let people in for whatever reason, they determined, because there were ways to deter that they're now using that are showing that those numbers can go down. And they could have been doing this the whole time. And I'm talking about the president and vice president here. So I think it's a hollow argument that they bring forward. It sounds good, but I think people are smarter than that. They know, wait a minute, that bill was several months ago. She's been sitting there for 3.5 years and hasn't done anything.
And that bill was not good enough. Senator Capito, I look forward to talking to you as Chairwoman Capito of Environment and Public Works, maybe of the policy conference, but I really, really hope you get that chairmanship. We need reform in the permitting that only a Republican chair can see. So thank you for joining me this morning. Always a pleasure.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Hugh. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You are welcome. I want to talk a little bit about relief efforts being run by Food for the Poor. My friend Schroeder, who lives in East Tennessee, gave me the update this morning. And he said, things in the mountain are largely stabilized, though devastated. It will be years in rebuilding, many displaced and homeless. There are still some trapped with limited support, deeply isolated by local conditions. The areas most deeply affected are small communities and fully rural areas. Look, this problem in North Carolina and East Tennessee is going to go on for a long time. The problem in Florida impacts far more people, but at least Food for the Poor can get to those people in Florida easily. It's still not possible to get a lot of relief supplies into the mountain areas that have been devastated. But Food for the Poor is open. They've got a website that is dedicated to people who want to help the victims of the hurricanes. And that's where the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I put our money, because we know Food for the Poor. We know they deliver. We know that they're in Florida. We wanted that relief to go. And so please head over to hughhewitt.com and be as generous as possible. hughhewitt.com, or you can text my name, Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555, 51555. Also want to remind you about the Battleground Talkers Tour. Go to battlegroundtour.com if you want to join us. How desperate is Team Harris? Pretty bad. Reince Priebus went on this week. Cut number 15, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, chief of staff for President Trump at the start of his first term. Reince, what did he say?
I mean, the reality is that for the first time in 32 years in this poll, it shows that Republicans are beating Democrats straight up. When you ask people a generic ballot in 32 years, it shows that Donald Trump's doing better with black voters, Hispanic voters, off the charts. But what the most important thing is, what happened last week is that what was working with female voters with Kamala Harris was that there was some feeling of joy in the air. Well, that joy is gone. She had a terrible week. She picked a pointless fight with Ron DeSantis. She was losing in the Sun Belt, and she tried to recover by going on The View, which a lot of women watch. She went on The View. You talked about it earlier. And she wanted to clarify the two most important issues that are facing these two candidates, the economy and immigration. And she bombed like Rory at the U.S. Open, and she went out there and said there was nothing she would do that would be different than Joe Biden.
I do fault Reince for using a golf metaphor, because I would have just said she bombed like Curtis LeMay. She was terrible. I'm not sure people know how bad Rory did at the U.S. Open, but she is bombing. How bad? She went on Roland Martin's podcast. You remember Roland from decades ago on CNN? He dogs me on Twitter all the time, and I don't need Roland, but evidently Kamala Harris does. Listen to this.
Let's fast forward to right now. His staff won't let him do a 60 Minutes interview. Every president for the last half century has done one, anyone who's running for president. Everyone has done it, except Donald Trump. He will not debate me again. I put out my medical records. He won't put out his medical records. And you have to ask, why is his staff doing that? And it may be because they think he's just not ready and unfit and unstable and should not have that level of transparency for the American people. There's a real choice in this election.
You mentioned.
Okay, how desperate is she? She's on Roland Martin, audience of 10, and she went there so she could say things like that without being challenged. The reason he will not do another debate is she turned down the Fox News debate, and he's not going back into a box canyon like CBS and ABC. They've demonstrated their bias. It is a deep and enduring bias. Why did she go? And I played the entire 10 minutes, so no one can accuse me of not playing the content. Why is she in a black church on Sunday in North Carolina in Greenville? Because there's no enthusiasm for her. There was a little bit of enthusiasm. There was a relief rally when Joe Biden dropped out, because Joe Biden is simply not, he doesn't have the capacity to continue as president. He ought to have stepped down as already, and we know that, and you know that. And so there was relief that he wasn't going to destroy the Democratic Party. But why did she pick Governor Walz? Why in the world did she go with the buffoon vote? There is no buffoon vote. I don't know how Minnesota. I am on AM 1280. I'm on up in the way north. I'm over on the southeastern corner of Minnesota. I cover the state completely. And I'm here to tell you, I do not know how you elected this man as your governor. I did do the governor debate among the Republican would-be, I moderated the debate among the Republican would-be nominees, and it was rough. I thought, not sure that any of them are ready. I didn't know anything about Tim Walz at the time. Not sure if any one of them were ready to take on an incumbent. But I don't know how he became an incumbent. I mean, Tim Pawlenty is a smart guy, and he was your governor for a long time. I don't know how you can go from Tim Pawlenty to the hunting video. If you haven't seen the hunting video, we'll play it one more time if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, or you can go over to HughHewitt.com and hit the watch now. This is Tim Walz with a rifle that he appears, it's a shotgun, that he appears not to know how to load or aim. And I'm not, if you see the other part of it, the press, and then he holds it straight up in the air, and then he's pointing to the stock and saying he's an old guy, so he needs the special stock. It was very embarrassing. As Selena Zito said, who comes from a hunting part of the country, it made her heart hurt. It's not the opening of The Deer Hunter. If you've ever seen the 1978 classic by Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken and others, you'll just say, that's real hunting. This was a nightmare of a video produced by a guy who doesn't know how to do anything, apparently well. And Kamala Harris cannot give a speech, except in a church where people are respectful. They don't applaud in church. She did 10 minutes on her Christian faith, which is great. It's not the end of the establishment clause. It's not a revolution. If Donald Trump went to Robert Jeffress' church and did 10 minutes, it would be the end of the world. We'd have every author out there telling us that this is the rise of Christian nationalism. I'm fine with politicians going to church. There was no substance to it. None. There is no substance to her. It's going to be a blowout, I think. But at the same time, I tell you, run through the tape. Go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Get involved. We cannot take this for granted. We absolutely must get Donald Trump back in the White House.